everybody, and welcome back. I hope everybody had a good break, even though it was a short one. So we're going to get started with our rest of our afternoon program, and I will pass it over to Shanique, who's going to introduce our next guest.
Hello, can you hear me? Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, my name is Shanique Jeffries, and I have the pleasure of introducing Mrs. Cheryl Bates Harris, the Senior Disability Advocacy Specialist with National Disability Rights Network. As a part of the employment team, Cheryl Bates Harris is responsible for training and implementation of the protection and advocacy for beneficiaries of Social Security program, a program designed to assist Social Security beneficiaries achieve maximum economic self-sufficiency. She has an extensive experience and expertise in vocational rehabilitation, VR, and the Client Assistance Program, CAP. Return to work issues, including job placement, supported and customized employment, reasonable job accommodations, and basic employment law, and Social Security programs and work incentives. She was appointed by President George Bush to serve on the Ticket to Work and Work Incentives Advisory Panel. Cheryl has also worked in coalition with national groups on issues around workforce investment and development of one-stop temporary assistance for needy families, TANF, and welfare to work and other employment-related initiatives. After losing a job due to an accident, Cheryl dedicated her career to helping other people who can work but may need assistance or accommodations to be successful. Cheryl now has over 30 years of experience working with people with disabilities and has conducted nationwide training for PNAs and CAPs and community organizations on substantive CAP VR sheltered workshops and sub-minimum wage issues and Social Security return to work. She is adamant that work is only the route out of poverty and everyone should be able to find real work in the community at real wages. I welcome Cheryl Bates Harris.
Thank you very much. I know exactly where you got that from. And if I had my druthers, I would just have on my staff bio at work that says Cheryl works on work. Because that is essentially what I do and what I have been doing forever. So thank you, Nancy, for inviting me to come and speak to you this afternoon. And so I just want to lay a couple of things out right now. If people can turn on their cameras, I do think it's kind of helpful for me. It also will kind of help me identify if it looks like somebody has a question or they're stuck on something I say. I am more than happy to be interrupted and take questions along the way. You can, one thing I'm not sure of is whether I'm sharing the PowerPoint or somebody else is sharing the PowerPoint. So right now I can see everybody and I can see your hands raised, you know, if you need to interrupt me. And if you are on Zoom, you know, you can use the reactions. If you raise your hand using the raise hand on the reaction button, I'll see it and I'll know to stop.
Hello, Mrs. Bates Harris. This is behind the scenes here. Would you like to have the PowerPoint on your screen and go through it at the appropriate times for yourself? We can make you a co-host so you can share screen.
Actually, if I share my screen, then I can't see. Sure, we'll try to do it that way. Or
we can try and do it on our end. Let's throw it up on our end and see what it looks like for you.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. Yeah, if I'll just say like next slide, if somebody there can control it, and that way I can still, if somebody raises their hand, they'll rise to the top of where I'm at, and hopefully I'll be able to see it.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, thank you so much. So first of all, I just want to comment that I was eavesdropping earlier when the first panel was speaking, and boy, did they throw out a lot of information and a lot of acronyms that I've been working in this field for years and years and years, and know that everybody has different names for different things. But and I was taking copious notes about what they were talking about. But I'm wondering, I mean, my focus and my forte has really been about working on the ground level to get people with disabilities interested in working, first and foremost, because if people don't know that they can work or that they should work, that certainly affects things greatly. But more importantly, once we get people to work, we need, well, let me just kind of stop there for a second. So I guess I would like to hear, particularly from the South Advocates and also from any parents, maybe one at a time, what are your questions, concerns, or reservations around, or what are your attitudes about employment of people with disabilities? So I know that's going to take a couple of minutes, but if we could actually, if people would like me to know what they think about employment, I would be very interested. Or if you have any particular questions from me of things that you want me to talk about, can we take a minute and do that? And do we have any volunteers, or does anybody have anything they want to say to me? I know this is awkward. You guys are in one room. I'm in another room, thousands of miles away, because I am actually in Pennsylvania. My office is in Washington, D.C. My office is 108 miles from my office. And doesn't everybody have a job where they commute 108 miles each way to work? No.
This is Angela Richardson. I'll go ahead. I feel that anyone that wants to work should be able to work. And I also feel that even if they have limitations or challenges in their attempt to work, if they can receive intentional intervention that allows them to develop the skills to work, then they can still succeed and accomplish whatever they want to accomplish.
Great. Thank you very much, because I think you just hit the nail on the head. That is absolutely my belief. So thank you. Anybody else want to say anything?
Hey, yes, it's Paige Perry. So I've long been an advocate for employing disabled folks. Like as a healthcare leader, I think, like if I were CEO, I've always said day one of the job, that's what I would do, because I think it would resolve a lot of organizational issues. Like, so that's purely like a fiscal thing, you know, that's selfish, like looking at the bottom line of the company or whatnot. But as the like sibling caregiver of somebody who's like super physically disabled, cognitively pretty okay, like, to be honest, we're on the state waiver in Alabama, but I'm just trying to keep him alive. You know, like our mother's deceased, our dad's disabled, and like when he deeply wants to be employed, and I just, you know, I can't say anything when he says that, because it's like I'm literally trying to get you fed, and you know, keeping my own employment viable is next to impossible as a caregiver. And so it's like, yeah, so that's kind of where we are. So like pro, but also like it looks great on paper to say, yeah, let's employ everybody, but let's also, I don't know, there's complexity there and nuance. And sorry about the dog in the background.
It's all right. Let me kind of respond to what you said. You know, the workforce participation rate, which they talked about on the first panel, he was talking about the workforce participation and how many people are working. The numbers have definitely declined over the last couple of years, but it used to be that the workforce participation rate of people without disabilities was between 75 and 80%, which means 20% of the people don't work. and that's normal because you have mothers that stay at home. You've got, all kinds of, not everybody chooses to work, but the workforce participation rate for people with disabilities, while the participation rate for people without disabilities hovered around, let's say 80%, the workforce participation rate for people with disabilities was only around 20%. So we have a 60% gap in the employment rate of people with disabilities. And that's assuming that, people want to work. So my issue has always been that what we want to do is increase the workforce participation rate for people that want to work. And for those that don't, they can fall into that 20% of, non-disabled people that choose not to work. So it really is sort of a choice, but I think sometimes a lot of choices are limited based on myths and information out there that's really incorrect and outdated. So I think that's a really good point. Thank you, Paige. And Paige, I don't see you on the screen, but you might be there. I'm just not seeing you. Anybody else have anything they'd like to say?
Yes, I brought up earlier that I believe that we should also ensure that when they get employed, they also stay employed as well. They're not mistreated during their employment. Employers don't try to use loopholes through which they can essentially exploit the workers under them, deny them their rights. I made mention of that. That's something I'm really interested in as well. Because I have personal experience with the situation that I'm describing.
Wow, I'd be interested in hearing that sometime off screen. Thank you. And that does happen, unfortunately. Jess.
Hi, this is Jess here. So one of the things that I have found interesting, and another person asked about this earlier as well, is we sometimes wonder, because one of the things I do for work is I'm an advocate at IPE meetings at the educational level. And sometimes I find that some of the goals are so low and the standard seems to be a bit lower to me that I sometimes feel like it does not create great opportunities for anybody with a disability in the educational system in order for them to get a good opportunity even with employment. So I sometimes wonder if, depending on the education outcomes and everything, support you get in the educational system, it gives you your right to FAPE. And then you turn around because you have the right supports and everything, and you have a higher chance if you have the right supports and everything in order to have a good education, which also helps with the workforce as well. So that's just one of my thoughts I have on the workforce with the goal.
Good point. Thank you. I don't see any other hands raised. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and start kind of with the PowerPoint presentation. So if the folks behind the scenes can bring that back up, I would appreciate it. And I'm going to start off this afternoon by kind of talking about, wait, is this the right one? Well, it doesn't matter. I can do this one first. So I've been doing employment work for a long time, and I want to kind of tell you, who I am. I think it kind of came out in the introduction that Shanique, did I get that name correct? It's a beautiful name. That I work with the National Disability Rights Network, which is the membership organization of the Protection and Advocacy Agencies. Now, I'm sure you guys know what the Protection and Advocacy Agency is in Alabama. And so there is an equivalent to that in every state and territory in the country. We have 57 Protection and Advocacy Agencies. And we also have 57 client assistance programs. Now, the reason the client assistance program isn't called protection and advocacy of, like vocational rehabilitation is a long and complicated story. But basically, all of these programs together provide legal-based services to individuals with disabilities who are facing various either abuse, neglect, discrimination, or some other horrific situation. So, and I have actually been at the National Disability Rights Network for 27 years. And for 6.5 years before that, I was the director of the Client Assistance Program in Delaware. And I also worked for the Client Assistance Program in Pennsylvania. So when, and my background even before that, and I think this kind of plays into why I'm where I am today. When I first started working with people with disabilities, I knew nothing about disability. I'm old, okay? I'm only 39, but I'm still going to say I'm old. Is that I had my motorcycle accident. I drove across the country and kind of reestablished myself in Pennsylvania. And I had no idea what I was going to do because I couldn't do the work that I had done previously because of the injuries sustained in the accident. So I saw an advertisement for a worker at a day habilitation program, which was really a place that, and the day habilitation program had opened as a direct result of closing one of the large institutions in Pennsylvania, the Pennhurst institution. So I knew nothing about people with disabilities. I certainly knew nothing about people who had been institutionalized. And I thought, gee, these people can use some help. So I went to work there. And we were basically, like I said, a day hab activity. And after I had been there for a little over 2 years, and I was working with these individuals on things like, communication skills and, safety issues, how to, properly cross the street, things like that, because they had been institutionalized most of their life. And they were all living in what Pennsylvania calls community living arrangements, which were group homes of 3. So one of the things that I was supposed to work with them on was activities of daily living. And so things like really important things, and I say that's very facetiously, very important things like learning to make a bed, how to set the table, those kinds of things. And every day that I took my little group of individuals into the ADL area, one of my clients would run away, basically, is what I called it. And so he would not only leave the room, but he would attempt to leave the building and try to run to the building next door. And the building next door was a sheltered workshop. Okay. In the day hab program, we basically just kept people busy all day long. Of course, we were doing it under the guise of an individual written rehabilitation plan and things, to kind of help them. But really, we were just keeping them busy. And next door was the sheltered workshop. And in the sheltered workshop, they actually had different contract jobs that the individuals there did. And of course, they got paid for doing the work over there. So even though it wasn't a lot of money, the client that would run away from me had a brother who worked in the sheltered workshop. And Eric, his name was, he was smart enough to know that what his brother did all day long netted him a paycheck at the end of the week versus what he did with me got him nothing. And I'm a slow learner. It took me a little while to figure this out, but one day it hit me that I was taking Eric into the ADL area and I was asking him to demonstrate to me that he could make his bed. And he was saying to me, even though he was nonverbal, I don't care about learning to make a bed. What I really want to do is go to work. And it struck me that that particular morning, I had gotten up and I had gone to my job and I hadn't made my bed. And that's when I kind of realized that we make people with disabilities go through things that logically don't make sense to the rest of us. We hold them to a higher standard of things than we do for ourselves. And so that's what kind of really put me on the path towards advocacy. And so I kind of learned as I went along and started to realize that people with disabilities can be employed just as well as, people without disabilities. every single one of us has challenges. Every one of us has skills and talents. And people with disabilities are phenomenal at figuring out alternate ways to do things. I mean, they are problem solvers every single day. So that's what really kind of put me on the path to thinking about employment in a real way. And so the employment of people with disabilities and the expectations of people with disabilities, I think, really is an ever evolving kind of trajectory. But it's not new that people with disabilities go to work. And I just want to make this one point, because I was looking at something earlier today, trying to find some information. People with disabilities who were institutionalized were put to work years and years ago. But then it was like servitude, it was like peonage. These large institutions, things had to be done. And things like growing some of their own vegetables and food in these, larger institutions. So it was the residents of the institution that participated and helped those things. It was the residents that often helped with, the cleaning, the cooking, all kinds of things. So there's always been kind of this expectation that people will do what they can do, but it's also the expectation that they're going to do it for free or for very, very, very low wages. So it's an evolving situation. And I just kind of want to make that point. And now that employment of people with disabilities is more or less, I think, being more commonly accepted as an expectation. I don't know how many of you are parents, but how many of you that are parents were told by your parents when you finished high school that, don't worry about it. You don't have to get a job because you're welcome to stay home, live at home forever, and we'll take care of your needs. Okay. I mean, I'm not seeing anybody kind of say, yeah, my parents told me I could live at home. The expectation was, if you, Niles, we'll get to you in a second here. Okay. The expectation was really that, I got my first car. My parents said, here's your car, but you have to buy your insurance and you have to pay for the gasoline. So how was I going to do that short of getting a job? Niles, you had something you wanted to say?
Oh no, I was just trying to say that's something that I heard a lot.
I'm sorry.
I was just answering your question, like how many of you were told that you remain at home and stuff like that. I was just answering the question that I did.
You were told that? Ask your parents if they'd like to adopt me. Anyway, okay, go ahead. So, the expectation is greater now that I think people with disabilities will go to work. And now that the expectation is more or less there, and a lot of it is because of changing philosophy and, changing attitudes about the abilities of people with disabilities, there is this tremendous fear that people with disabilities, if they go to work, are going to lose their benefits. And their benefits is basically their safety net. So this particular presentation is actually about debunking the myths and fears about disability benefits and work. Okay. I focus specifically here on Social Security benefits because that is the largest benefit that's available to people with disabilities. So I'm going to go through it. Now, Social Security can be a little bit confusing. If you have a question, please stop and interrupt me. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide, and I'll go ahead and start. As you can see, this is about debunking the myths and fears. So I think the first question that we have to ask of people with disabilities is, do they want to work? Is work the right thing for them? And that's really an individual decision. Although I personally think that work has a lot of important values for people, including the fact that it gets people out of the house. It eliminates the feeling of isolation that people get when, they don't have anywhere. The feeling of isolation from being stuck at home. And so I think work is really important. It gives people a purpose to get up in the morning. I mean, studies after study for specific disabilities, particularly someone with a mental health disability, work is part of recovery. It gives them a purpose and things to do. So, if people choose to go to work, I think our job is to help them figure out what it is they need, what services and supports they need, and to help them and to make sure that they are treated fairly and with dignity and respect, just like any other employee. So it's really important that if people choose to go to work, that they understand that there are a lot of services and supports available to them and to help them go to work, and that the rewards often outweigh the risks. Now, so this question here is pretty obvious. Who can't use additional income? Do you know anybody that would turn down the opportunity for additional income if they had the opportunity? And since this is specifically talking about Social Security benefits, because they are the largest, I was on a call yesterday with the Social Security Administration, and they indicated that there are 7.5 million individuals on supplemental security income, SSI, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And there are approximately 2.5 million people who get Social Security disability insurance. So if we can go to the next slide, I will explain the differences in these two in a second. So we know that when we exclude people from with disabilities from, when we exclude people from work when we exclude people from work, we are essentially excluding them from community life. And that's, integration into the community, the ability to participate in, activities in the community, restaurants, all kinds of things. Because if you don't have any money, you don't really get to, you're not able to participate in some of these things. And that continued exclusion leads to loneliness, diminished productivity, and losses in human potential. And more importantly, and this is the point that I think people often forget, people who are on Social Security disability insurance get on the average $1,200 a month. And that's for people who have a work history. People who are on SSI, and that's for aged people and people who have never worked, are currently getting $914 a month. That means that for individuals who are on SSI, they are living 25% below the poverty level. Okay, 25% below the poverty level. And how many people have you talked to that have ever said, I want to be poor when I grow up? Okay. I've never had anybody tell me that. My favorite expression is the one that I've been rich and I've been poor, and rich is better. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. All right, so we know that people who are on benefits, that there's a lot of people who are not aware of what their options are or how work will actually affect their benefits. And I did hear mention this morning or right after lunch on the panel that the Vocational Rehabilitation Agency indicated that they have brought benefits counseling in-house, which I think is really, really important. Because when I used to do job placement, I would be working with clients who had been working with vocational rehabilitation for a couple of years. Some of them were participating in different training programs, and my job was to help them find a job at the end of it. And I cannot tell you, this was 30 some years ago now at this point, actually more than that, but I would help somebody find a job. And then I would say, okay, now we need to, check in with them after they had started, see how they were doing. And then I'd say, okay, well, now we need to make sure that we report your earnings to the Social Security Administration. And they would look at me, and nobody had ever explained to them that if they went back to work, it might have an impact on their benefits, and people would quit their jobs after a lot of effort. And so I think it's really important that people understand how the benefits work in order to really approach employment as a serious option. So next slide. And I'm sorry, folks, if I sound like I'm struggling, it's because I really intended this to be tomorrow's presentation, but I can reverse them with no problem. So in 1999, there was a piece of legislation that was signed into law by President Clinton, and it was called the Ticket to Work and Work Incentives Improvement Act. And basically, that was the culmination of about 5 years worth of effort on the part of advocates who wanted to remove the disincentives to employment and provide opportunities for people with disabilities to go to work. Now, this was really important, and I can tell you this from a personal perspective. When I had my motorcycle accident, I was 27 years old, and I was getting a benefit amount that was not, huge. It was like $683 a month. $683 a month was not a lot of money, and still isn't a lot of money. But when I went back to work, when I went back to work, all I had to earn was $500 a month, and I would lose the $683 a month. So that was a pretty significant decrease in terms of being able to rely on money. So that's clearly a disincentive for most people. Why give up more money than you're earning, or that potentially you can earn? So we work to remove many of the disincentives in the Social Security rules to make them more favorable, to encourage people to work and take that risk. So we'll go on to the next one. So the Ticket to Work did that, okay? And it created something called the Ticket to Work program. Now, for anybody who's participating in vocational rehabilitation services, you are participating in the Ticket program whether you know it or not. And that's because the Ticket to Work program itself was Social Security's brainchild on what can we do to expand services to people with disabilities. Now, I'll give you a little bit of historical background. The Social Security Administration, prior to 1992, well, going back to the 50s, would give a block grant of money to the state vocational rehabilitation agencies. They might give them, I don't have amounts anymore, but let's say they gave them $3 million. Their expectation was that they would use that $3 million to help Social Security beneficiaries go to work. Excuse me. And guess what? It didn't happen. VR would say, thank you very much for this money, and still not provide services to Social Security beneficiaries. So the Ticket to Work program, so then they changed it, and then they went to a cost reimbursement system. Social Security Administration under law will still to this day reimburse the VR agency for the cost of any services that are provided to a Social Security beneficiary when they went back to work and achieved what's called the level of substantial gainful activity. And less than like 15% of the Social Security beneficiaries who go to vocational rehabilitation actually achieve an employment outcome. So this kind of changed the focus as far as Social Security was concerned. And they said, okay, vocational rehabilitation doesn't want to provide services to our beneficiaries. Maybe we need to open it up to more community providers. So that's what the Ticket program itself does. It offered services to individuals between the ages of 18 and 64 who are receiving Social Security benefits, the opportunity to choose the support of their choice in order to go back to work. So this is kind of an invisible sort of an invisible program if you're going to vocational rehabilitation. But otherwise, there are some other providers that we're going to talk about a little bit further on. So anyway, the Ticket to Work is a free program. It's for beneficiaries, either individuals who are getting SSI or SSDI, and it's to encourage them to return to work. So we'll move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so the Ticket program basically can connect you with free employment services to number one, help you decide if working is right for you. And then if you decide that it is, they can help you prepare for work, and they can help you they can help you find a job, and they are there for the long term, for the next like 5 years, to help provide services and supports for you to continue working. So if somebody was interested and wanted to know who can help besides vocational rehabilitation, this is the website where you can find about who is participating in the Ticket to Work program. Okay. And again, it's a voluntary program. It's not, you don't have to go back to work, but Social Security kind of invites you to think about employment. Next slide, please. Okay. So again, this just is where you can ask questions. They have a Ticket to Work helpline. You can find out if you're eligible for a ticket program. You can also find out who are the providers that can help you. And this is some very basic information on the Ticket to Work program. Next slide. So VR is not the only game in town that can help individuals access services and supports to go to work. But through the ticket program, there are organizations called employment networks, and the employment networks are really your community rehabilitation programs. They are often things like the ARC programs, the agencies that provide services, United Cerebral Palsy, the Jewish Vocational Services, Goodwills, Easter Seals, things like that. Those programs not only operate generally under fee-for-service with vocational rehabilitation, but they can be an employment network. And if they're operating as an employment network, then they have a contract with the Social Security Administration to where they will get payment after the individual goes to work. Unlike when they're operating as a community rehab program under a fee-for-service with VR. There, they get paid for providing a service, but not for an outcome. And the workforce ENs, you had the gentleman from the Workforce Council and the Workforce Boards talking about the fact that what we call the generic system, the American Job Centers, the one-stops, the agency that operates, programs for unemployment insurance and dislocated workers and, all of the other consolidated programs for workforce development, they are also employment networks. So you could potentially get services there. You have the state vocational rehabilitation agencies, which have been around now for almost 90 years. And of course, you heard from the executive, or maybe not. Anyway, vocational rehabilitation is your program. Specifically, the VR agencies get money, specifically to provide services to individuals with disabilities so that they can obtain, maintain, or retain employment consistent with their interests, skills, strengths, and abilities. So VR is the biggest game in town in that they are the largest funder of services for people with disabilities. And going along with the ticket, the work incentive planning and assistance programs have been developed over the last 22 years, specifically to work with individuals on a one-on-one basis so that that individual understands exactly what is going to happen to their benefits and when it is going to how it's going to be affected if the individual returns to work. One second. Oh, excuse me. So work incentive, work benefits counseling, I think, is really important to help people really understand that they can go back to work and it's not going to have an immediate impact. And then, of course, there's the protection and advocacy for beneficiaries of Social Security, which is the program I currently kind of shepherd, as I call it. And that program, again, is funded under the Social Security Administration, specifically to help people overcome barriers to employment. So if individuals are facing discrimination, if individuals are not being provided accommodations, anything that is going to stand as a barrier to an individual in employment and is a Social Security beneficiary, then then they can help with that. And of course, most of the protection, the PABS program, which is a term I'd really kind of like to throw away. It's just an arm, it's an advocacy arm of the Protection and Advocacy Agency. And most of the protection and advocacy agencies also house the Client Assistance Program, which is a program specifically to address issues with state vocational rehabilitation and other programs funded under the Rehab Act. So Alabama ADAP has both the PABS program and the Social Security, and the Client Assistance Program. Next slide, please. Okay, so the Employment Network, as I indicated, it's a private, could be a private or could be even a public entity that has an agreement with the Social Security Administration to help provide services to people with disabilities. So your public workforce systems, such as the American Job Centers or an employment network, community rehab providers can be an employment network as well as vocational rehabilitation. So next slide. All right. So here's where I think it's really important. People need to understand how work affects benefits in order to have people attempt work or keep them from quitting their jobs due to fear of their loss of benefits. And like I said, when I was doing job placement, had more than one individual suddenly decide that no, they wanted to work, but they also weren't going to risk their benefits. And so they would just quit their jobs. So the work incentive planning and assistance programs provide counseling about work and earnings and how it will affect both your Social Security disability insurance, your supplemental security income, or other public benefits. So I think next slide, please. Okay, so this is where it is really important for people to understand that Social Security Administration has two different benefit programs, okay? And people often will say, oftentimes people will not tell me that they're on a Social Security disability benefit. Oftentimes people will just kind of say, I'm on Social Security. And that includes people who have a long work history, who have stopped working because of a disability, but they don't want to identify and say, I'm on disability insurance now. They just like to say, I'm on Social Security, with the assumption then that people will think they're simply retired because Social Security also pays retirement benefits. So there's two types of programs. Title II, which is old age survivor and disability insurance. It's an insurance program, and it includes things like a childhood disability benefit, which I'll talk about in a second, Social Security disability insurance, which is the larger portion of that program, and disabled widows or widower benefits. Now, a childhood disability benefit is basically Title II insurance. Sorry. Title II is a disability insurance program that is paid into. And so Most of the time, children can only get supplemental security income. And I'll explain that in just a second. But Title II benefit is an insurance program, and you acquire coverage by working and paying into FICA taxes. I'll talk more about that in a minute. Title 16 is known as Supplemental Security Income, or SSI. Most people don't realize that even though this program is administered through the Social Security Administration, it is a general welfare program specific to people with disabilities. When you look back on the war on poverty that was started in the Johnson administration, and many of you may not even be old enough to know what I'm talking about with the Johnson administration, but every single state had some kind of payment that they would make available to people with disabilities or people who were aged, to kind of provide them some bare subsistence. And the benefit payments varied widely across the country. So it was during the Johnson administration that they decided to basically federalize this program and to provide some consistency across the country in terms of what people could expect. So there's SSI, which is supplemental insurance. You don't need to have paid into it. And then there's SSDI, which is disability insurance. So we'll move to the next slide, please. All right. So both of them use the same definition of disability. But like I said, for SSDI, FICA taxes have to be paid and you have to meet insured status, which basically means that the standard rule, and you guys don't need to know this, but I'm going to tell you anyway, is that you have to have worked 10 of the last 20 years. And if you're younger than that, you basically have to have worked half of the period of time that based on your age. So for instance, I was 27. I was not expected to go to work until I was 18. And basically they were looking to see whether I had worked, 5 years out of the last 9 years. And so Social Security disability insurance is paid based on your work history and your work earnings. Everybody gets a different amount and it's based on their work history. And with SSDI, individuals can qualify for Medicare after a 24-month waiting period. So for the first 24 months, you don't get any insurance with SSDI. And the reason for that is because the belief, part of it was a cost-saving measure, and the other part of it was a cost-saving measure that Congress looked at, but also because you have to have paid into or you have to have been employed, there was a belief that individuals could be covered by their previous employment, either short-term disability or long-term disability benefits may be available to most people. And so therefore, if we could delay providing the Medicare, it would basically save the federal government money. With Title 16 or SSI, there is no such thing as a required work history. You can, the only requirement is that you either have to be aged, which is 65 or older. You have to have very limited resources. This is a needs-based program. So in order to qualify, before they even look at whether or not you have a disability or your age, they're going to look at what resources are available to you. But the good thing about Title 16 is it does come with Medicaid, and out of the two federal health care programs, Medicaid is the better program in terms of paying. So some people will get both. And the way that happens is if a person with the disability becomes SSI eligible, let's say at age 18 or age 19, and they work a very part-time job, eventually they're going to earn enough credits of coverage that it would qualify them for a small amount of SSDI. So some people do get both. Next slide, please. Okay, so the first myth here is if you go to work, you will lose your cash benefit. And so if you work and you receive, the truth of the matter is that if you go to work and you're receiving SSDI benefits, you can maintain basically all of your benefits for at least a 12-month period of time and possibly longer. And so you do not immediately lose your cash benefit. And with SSI, you can always maintain some of your benefits and always increase your monthly income. And later on, I have some examples around this. There is no way an individual who is on SSI will have less disposable income at the end of the month by working than not working. And that's because SSI really encourages and has some good incentives in the way they count earned income. Next slide. So for SSDI, I indicated that you can keep your benefits for at least up to a year. And how does that happen? You have a trial work period, which is a 9-month period of time where you can basically test your wings and work as much as you possibly can. And it has absolutely no impact on your benefits. So if your benefit amount is, let's say $1,000 a month, and you get a job where you're earning $2,000 a month, for the first 9 months, you get to keep not only your wages of $2,000 a month, but your benefit amount. And it has no impact on your cash benefit. And then following the trial work period, there's something called the extended period of eligibility. And what this really is a period of reentitlement. If for any reason, after your 9-month trial work period and you continue working and you're not able to sustain that on a permanent level, then during that extended period of eligibility, if you stop working, your benefit is automatically reinstated. Okay, so you don't have to worry about what happens if I can't continue working, because if you're in the extended period of eligibility, which is 36 months, and you stop working or you can't work for a month or whatever, you just notify the Social Security Administration and your benefit is automatically, you're still entitled to that benefit. Also, with the trial work period, you have something that's called cessation and grace. After you've worked for 9 months, and I'm really going to kind of keep this simple for you guys because you don't really necessarily need to learn this level of detail, but you need to understand how it works. You complete your 9 months trial work period. The next month is what we call cessation, technically, if you're working at a certain level. So you get paid for that month and 2 additional months, again, with no impact on your benefits. So that's 12 months that you can basically work before a benefit would start to be affected under SSDI. And the nice thing about that is that during that 9 months, you can start to plan for the transition if it's going to happen to just your wages and off of benefits, especially if your wages are higher. Now, this is where I said earlier, back when I returned to work, my benefit was $683 a month. All I had to earn to meet what was called SGA back then was $500 a month. But I was determined that I was going to go back to work. I was going to be productive, and I was going to figure out what my career and my life, my future looked like. So for me, it was important enough that I make the decision to go to work rather than continue on benefits. But those are the kinds of things that WIPAs can help you with. There's also something that if you are working and you have specific expenses that are related to your disability. Let's say, for instance, we have an individual, you're an individual who uses a power wheelchair and you have to use specialized transportation because of your wheelchair. You can't drive and it's, too far to roll, so to speak. So you have to use paratransit or some other accessible transportation. That is a work expense that is directly related to your impairment. So you can deduct that off of your gross wages before it even starts, which will lower the amount of your gross wages, and therefore potentially you can get your benefits longer. And there's a lot of things that are impairment related work expenses. Could be transportation. It could be personal assistance services that you have to pay for in order to get up, get dressed, and you're ready for work. It could be medication copays. It could be anything that's related to your disability. And that is a largely underutilized work incentive. A lot of people don't realize that. And then there's also things called subsidy and special conditions. A subsidy would be, for instance, if an individual is starting out working and has a job coach at the beginning, if the individual is in fact paying for the job coach, then that could become an impairment related work expense. If the employer is actually subsidizing part of your salary because they're paying for the job coach or whatever. So subsidy and special conditions, I don't really want to talk about a lot right now. You just need to know that potentially they exist, or individuals working need to know they exist. I should say that. Next slide, please. Okay, so SSI is supplemental security income, and that's the SSI program, because it is a welfare-based program and because we want to reduce the dependency on public benefits, that program favors earned income much better than the Social Security disability insurance. And generally the rule is that $1, that half of what your earnings are will affect the amount of your benefit. Okay, so basically they will reduce your benefit check by $1 for every $2 you earn. Now that's not exactly right, but that's a good rule of thumb. And I've got an example coming up. There's also, with the SSI program, you also get those impairment related work expenses. If you are blind and you meet the definition of statutory blindness, which is vision no greater than 2200 with best correction, or a limited field of vision, if you are eligible for SSI benefits based on statutory blindness, you get what's called blind work expenses. And you get to deduct all work-related expenses, or you get to you get to exclude work expenses, things like taxes that you pay, transportation, meals at work, all of those things. So it really is a favorable, they're better than impairment related work expenses because they come off dollar for dollar. And then there's something called the Plan for Achieving Self-Sufficiency, and I call that the Dream Maker. A Plan for Achieving Self-Sufficiency is kind of a plan that the individual develops that allows them to set aside resources in order to help them achieve a vocational objective of their choosing. And I'm not going to talk a lot about it here because you would be eligible for vocational rehabilitation services. VR gets that money specifically to provide services. So I don't necessarily want to encourage people to use their own money to develop their own vocational plan. Let's have VR do what they're supposed to do, and the client assistance program can always help you with that. So I'm going to kind of step aside from that for a minute. Next slide, please. All right, so how does this all really work? Here's an example, and I kind of made this up. Kenji is working a part-time basis, and he earns $600 a week, okay? He receives the federal benefit rate, which is $914 a month, and he has no other income, okay? This is kind of a very simple, quick and dirty way to show people who are on SSI and afraid that, they're going to lose their benefits, how it works. So we start with the $914 benefit amount. And the first thing that all SSI beneficiaries basically get to do is deduct a $20, what we call the general income exclusion, and then the $65 earned income exclusion. So we take that right off the top and it doesn't count. So that would leave them with $829 of potential benefit. Then we take the amount of his earnings and divide it in two because of that 2-for-1 offset. So we then deduct another $300, which is half of his earnings. That would mean that his benefit check that he would continue to be eligible for would be $529 a month. Does everybody understand how I got to that? It's a pretty simple formula. So when you add the $600 earnings that he gets to the $529 that he would still continue to be eligible for from SSI, his monthly income would now be $1,129. Now, which one of those two is greater? Obviously, the $1,129. So if I were to offer you $914 a month or $1,129 a month, which one would you want to take? Okay, that's how people can really kind of understand with SSI. And many, I would probably say most of the people with disabilities that really struggle with employment are individuals who have never worked, who don't have work experience. And so they might find them in this category. And for me, it would be much more appealing to have $1,129 a month to live with rather than the $914. And so work can make the difference between choosing whether you're going to have peanut butter sandwiches for dinner or you're going to have some kind of, chicken or a steak. Next slide, please. Okay, so myth number 2. And again, my apologies to all of you because the interactive stuff I really kind of worked in for the other presentation, but we'll do it. Okay, so the second myth that we continue to hear is that if I lose my benefits, I'm going to have to go through that arduous, long, involved, convoluted 2.5-year process in order to get your benefits back again. And people believe that that is going to be a huge disincentive because people aren't really sure when they first go back to work. Are they going to be able to maintain the job? Are they, physically going to be able to handle it? Is the employer going to keep them? So the myth is that if you work and you leave Social Security benefit roll due to earnings, you can now, it's not a myth, you can return to the benefits through a quick application process and get your benefits back within a few weeks. And that's something that we call expedited reinstatement or the easy back on. So if within 60 months of the time your benefits would stop, and this is primarily with individuals with SSDI, although SSI, all you have to do is make a reinstatement application within 60 months and your benefits will be reinstated with 6 months of provisional benefits paid when you reapply. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to just take your word at everything that you're still going to be eligible. What they do then is they reinstate the benefits and then they do what's called a continuing disability review. So they would then do a medical review to make sure that you still have a disability that meets the definition of disability and that there has not been medical improvement. So this again is huge for people who are afraid about what if, especially people whose disability is, they can have good months, they can have bad months, and all disabilities are not static. Individuals with diabetes may have a period where it's stable for a long period of time, and then all of a sudden it's not. So that's how they don't have to worry about going through that arduous Social Security process. And again, based on the call that I had yesterday, there are 984,000 Social Security applications that they are trying to process that have been backlogged over the last 3 years. So again, people, when they hear that, it's like, oh my God, if I have to reapply, I'll never get my benefits back because it's going to take too long. So this assures a level of sustainability in terms of your benefit. Next slide, please. Okay, people believe that if they go to work, you're going to lose your health care. And I'm here to say that your Medicare, your Medicaid, and or the Medicaid buy-in programs are available to people when they go back to work. Under the current rules, if you are an SSDI beneficiary and you go back to work and you lose your cash benefit, okay, you will continue to be Medicare eligible for Part A and Part B for 4.5 years beyond the current 3-year extended period of eligibility. So what does that really mean? That means that you don't have to worry about other health insurance for 7.5 years. And most people, if they go back to work and sustain their employment, oftentimes you're going to get company paid health insurance benefits. So, but if you don't, you will still continue to have the Medicare. And with the SSI, if the only thing that is keeping an individual from a cash benefit check is earnings, because eventually you will reach a point where we call it the break-even point. Your earnings are sufficient enough that you will no longer continue to receive a cash benefit. You will still be eligible for Medicaid insurance as long as you continue to otherwise look like an SSI individual. And what does that mean? It means that you continue to have the disability. You're not getting an SSI benefit check because of your earnings, but you still have limited resources. You still qualify based on the resources, and your Medicaid can continue indefinitely or until you reach the state threshold amount. And each state has a different threshold, and the threshold is based on earnings. And even if you meet the earnings for the state threshold, if you have high utilization, if the individual has high utilization, let's say they're a person who needs attendant care services, then they can look at an individualized threshold based on your utilization. And of course, we also have the Medicaid buy-in in states where it's available. And I believe that currently we're down to 38 states with the Medicaid buy-in. So healthcare is still available to you when you go to work, even if you don't, or if you don't have employer paid insurance. Next slide. All right. This is my favorite, student earned income exclusion. And I really liked earlier today the fact that they were talking about the importance of working with people with disabilities up to the age of 24, okay? Because we know that the earlier we get people attached to the workforce, the longer they're going to work and the more they're going to earn over their life. But this is something called the student earned income exclusion. So if you are an individual on SSI, and remember when I said that Social Security Administration views earned income very favorably, this benefit, if you are under the age of 20, can't remember now if it's 22 or 24, and I should know this, you can exclude up to $2,220 a month of gross earned income, or an annual amount of $8,950, and none of that would reduce your SSI benefit. If you are a student and you are working, it's called the student earned income exclusion. And so summer youth employment, even an individual who is working, who is a student, and a student is defined as, regularly attending school, but that doesn't necessarily mean college. It can be, any public school. And if you're under a plan, if you are regularly enrolled in some institution of learning, whether it's high school or a certificate program or a community college or a college, and you are earning money, you can keep an additional $8,950 a year. And that is huge. Not only does it encourage people to try work, but that's an enormous boost to somebody's income. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we've come up to the PASS plan, the plan for achieving self-support. And I call it the get out of poverty plan, because what it allows you to do is to set aside income and or resources. Remember, SSI is a needs-based program. The maximum amount of resources that an individual is allowed to have and maintain SSI eligibility is $2,000. Now, you're also allowed to have one car that you use for appointments, medical appointments, and you're allowed to have the house that you live in. But other than that, you cannot accumulate assets. You can't put money in a savings account. You can't put money into a 401k program. You basically have to have very limited resources. So a plan for achieving self-support allows you to take income or resources that you have and put them in a separate account. And then, and the money in that account is used to basically establish some individualized plan for you in order to achieve a specific vocational work goal. So if an individual wanted to go to college and they wanted to have a computer, and they, needed like other tools and things in order to participate in this school plan, then you could use that PASS plan. You could basically self-fund your plan, and hopefully the services that are in your PASS plan, you would basically be funding your own vocational objective. As I indicated before, I think that vocational rehabilitation can also do that, but there's a lot of people who don't want to go to vocational rehabilitation or whatever, and they prefer to do it their way. If VR says, nope, we can't support that vocational objective, we're not going to do that, then people can resort to a PASS plan if they want to. And so this is a written plan. It has to be agreed to, and it's not for everybody because it does require discipline and management. If you say that you're going to put $300 a month of your income into a PASS plan, you have to put $300 a month into your PASS plan. And if you skip doing it 1 month because let's say you got a flat tire and you found out that you needed 4 new tires for your car to keep driving it, and you decide to spend it on tires, then you are violating the terms of your PASS plan. But it is something that can be really good. And so the WIPA programs can help people develop PASS plans. Next slide, please. Okay. It's really important that when people go to work that they understand that they have to report their earnings. And why do they have to report their earnings? Because of the work, or because Social Security, should have said this at the beginning. The definition of disability in the Social Security Administration is the strictest definition out of 67 federal definitions of disability. And the definition for Social Security purposes, and people kind of ask me all the time, the definition under Social Security is that you have to have a physical or mental impairment that is significant enough to prevent you from engaging in any job in the U.S. economy because it is going to last for 12 months or more, and or it's going to result in death. Okay. And so that's a really strict definition of disability versus the definition of disability that would qualify someone for vocational rehabilitation services. And that definition in comparison is simply the presence of a physical or mental impairment that results in an impediment to employment. And then when you look at the definition of disability under the ADA, it's very, very different. So the intent of the Social Security program was to basically provide a level of income to individuals with disabilities once they were no longer able to work. And so you have to report your income because there are rules. And one of the rules is you report your income to the Social Security Administration. And people need to also understand that when they go back to work, it will take a while for Social Security to process the wages and to stop the benefit checks when you go back to work. And that results, if it's not reported it can result in an overpayment. And overpayments are, by definition, a benefit check that someone has received to which they were not entitled. And so you want to minimize the amount of the overpayment by regularly reporting your income. And not only that, but currently, since 2005, the Social Security Administration has been required to issue something called wage receipts. For years, overpayments happened. Again, I'll go back to my personal history. I knew what the Social Security rules were. I knew that after I'd gone back to work for a year that my benefit checks should stop. And yet they continued to come for 2.5 years, even though I had reported my earnings. And that's because I reported my earnings, but it's like sending somebody a letter in the mail. The information sat on somebody's desk and it didn't get into the system, into the Social Security record. So they kept sending me the checks, and I had an overpayment of about $12,000, I think it was. And I knew that eventually I would have to pay that money back. But you want to reduce the overpayments because people think as long as the checks keep coming, then obviously I'm entitled to that amount of money. And most people spend money rather than save money. So you want to minimize the overpayments by reporting it. Now, let's talk about the wage receipt. Social Security was required under the Social Security Protection Act to issue receipts so that issue receipts to people so that they had proof that they had reported their earnings to Social Security. Because the belief was that people got overpaid because they were trying to defraud the system. Even though we knew, Chantel, I'll get you in just a second. I just noticed you popped up there. Even though people knew they had reported their earnings, they were still getting overpayment notices. So the Social Security Protection Act basically required that Social Security acknowledge the wage reporting by giving you a receipt. Now, the receipt doesn't look like a grocery store receipt or anything like that. The wage receipt actually looks identical to a notice from the Social Security Administration. The way they've implemented it is that information not only has to be received in the office, but somebody has to open up your record and put a note in that record that says, Cheryl has reported that she started work on X, Y, and Z day and is going to be earning $2,000 a month. And so, or reported that she is earning $2,000 a month. Then Social Security, that also puts an alert in the system for the Social Security Administration to follow up if they don't receive wage confirmation, which is actually your copies of your wage receipt. They could, whatever. So it looks like a notice that comes in the mail, and people should always, always, always read your Social Security notices. So just like you always read your notices from the IRS. You don't ignore those things because typically they're important. Chantel, don't forget to take yourself off mute.
Hi, this is Chantel. I had a question about the past plan. Can you have an ABLE account with that?
You can have an ABLE account and a PASS plan. They serve two different purposes. The PASS plan is strictly to fund services to achieve a vocational objective. A PASS, and it's utilizing income other than, it's basically, first of all, only for an individual who qualifies for SSI. You have to be an SSI eligible individual, or you have to be able to become an SSI eligible individual. So then basically what a PASS plan does is it allows you to set aside resources that would otherwise be counted against your asset limit with SSI for a specific vocational objective. And, there's a plan and it has to be submitted to the PASS cadre. You can also have an ABLE account, and an ABLE account could also pay for vocational related services. You just can't have both of them working, or you can't use ABLE funds for the same vocational objective as you would a PASS plan. An ABLE account has much broader usage, but yes, the short answer is yes, you can do it. The long answer is I'm not the best person to advise you as to exactly how to make that work, but there are people out there that are very knowledgeable in that area. Yes.
Thank you.
And you mentioned ABLE, and I think that that's something, thank you for reminding me. I had it on my notes for tomorrow. An ABLE account is a really, really good opportunity for people to accumulate assets over and above the $2,000 to maintain eligibility for SSI and for Medicaid. But the bad news, as you probably all know, is that currently your disability has to be onset before the age of 26 to qualify for an ABLE account. When I had my accident, I was 27 years old. So had they existed back when I had it, I would not have been eligible for one. The good news is that the ABLE Age Adjustment Act was part of the omnibus package with the federal budget. And so in 3 years, which seems like a long way away, individuals up whose disability onset is before they turn 46 will also be eligible for an ABLE account. So thank you for reminding me. Next slide, please. Okay, people often think that if they don't report their wages to the Social Security Administration is not going to know. And there is nothing further than the truth from that. Even if you don't report income to the Social Security Administration, they will find out about it. How do they find out about it? They will find out about it when their computer systems between unemployment insurance compensation and the IRS and the Social Security Administration merge records, usually only once or twice a year. But the Social Security will find out that there have been wages reported on your Social Security number. And that will usually result in overpayments. It creates whole bunches of problems. But the worst part is that the Social Security Administration usually decides that if you chose not to report your income, they will consider it fraud. And so that can get you in some legal complications. And also it gives them authority to do some pretty nasty things. Like they can take your income tax return that you think you're entitled to, and you don't get it, and you don't get it only to find out that the Social Security Administration has taken your income tax return and applied it towards your overpayment notice. They can also report it to employers, and they can garnish your wages. And employers don't like situations where there's wage garnishment. And so it does, in fact, they find out about it. Oftentimes it's not until years later, but you do not want to get caught. Social Security is looking more and more at overpayment situations as fraud. People are being charged with fraud rather than just an overpayment. So it's very important. Next slide. All right. There's lots of people out there that can help you with Social Security related issues. Okay. First of all, there are specially trained staff in every Social Security office called area work incentive counselors and work incentive liaisons. These are supposedly people within the Social Security Administration who are specially trained to understand the work rules. And when I say work rules, those are post-entitlement issues. Generally, Social Security's goal is to get the right check to the right person at the right time. They're really good at identifying, retirement benefits, death benefits, survivor benefits, those kinds of things. Many Social Security employees themselves do not understand the work rules because, well, they don't. So these area work incentive counselors and work incentive liaisons understand them. So if there's questions or problems, you should find out who are the AWICs and the work incentive liaisons in the offices. There's also the benefit planners from the WIPA programs, not just the WIPA programs anymore. I heard Alabama say that they employ benefits counselors. The same training that's available under the WIPA program, which are work incentive planning and assistance programs, those are specifically Social Security funded positions. There's not enough of them. So many VR agencies, Centers for Independent Living, other places have counselors that are trained using the same training and the same standard of certification, but they basically expanded the infrastructure to make it, excuse me, to make the services and the information more readily available. And of course, I've mentioned my program here, the Protection and Advocacy for Beneficiaries of Social Security. They can explain generically at a high level exactly, you know, what the rules are. My individuals in the PAVS program do what I call benefits light. They can tell you how the work rules work, but I encourage them not to do the in-depth benefits counseling, because in order to do the benefits counseling, you need a lot of background information, you know, including when benefits started, how many months of your trial work period have you used, you know, what have you used, etc. My programs get paid, I guess currently it's about 9 million, get funded about $9 million a year to do that, to do work that nobody else can do. The benefit planners, the WIPA programs get $25 million to specialize in what they do. So we don't need to duplicate each other's services. We just need to be able to work together and supplement services. So next slide. That might be the last one. I think it is. Okay. So I did this kind of in reverse order. Oh, other things. Thank you. Okay. So other things you should need to keep in mind. There are lots of programs and services out there to help individuals with disabilities. So people should speak up and let other people know what they need in order to work and to increase their independence. Everyone should be their own best advocate. Okay. And again, there are programs that can, like Centers for Independent Living, that can help people understand how to be a self-advocate. And a self-advocate, it's not that you need special training, it's just you have to not be afraid to express yourself, your interests, what you need, where you'd like to go. I think one of the biggest, or I think a common mistake for people with disabilities who are independently seeking employment make is that they often disclose disability prematurely without needing to, and therefore potentially are setting themselves up for discrimination based on stigma and stereotyping. And when individuals are, you know, more than happy to disclose that they're a person with a disability, if you're talking to an employer or another individual who doesn't understand disability, who's not familiar with it, that can send up red flags. There's all kinds of beliefs in the employment world about people with disabilities. I had an employer tell me last week when I was talking to him about something else that he doesn't like to hire people with disabilities, not because he doesn't think they're capable individuals, but he said to me, once I hire them, I'm stuck with them forever. And it was his belief that if he hired a person with a disability and they were not able to do the work, or their quality of their work was poor, or whatever it was, their attendance was poor, or their attitude was poor, you know, or they were belligerent, whatever it was, that he was stuck with them forever, because if he fired them, he would have a charge of discrimination against him. And so I spent a great deal of time explaining to him that under the ADA, a person has to be otherwise qualified to do the work. And qualified to do the work means exactly that. We don't change the standards that are expected of other employees, and we don't change, either quantity or quality. But he was really under the belief that if he hired a person, he'd be stuck with them forever, and he couldn't risk that. So individuals need to know that not only should they not disclose their disability prior to being hired, the only time they should disclose their disability is if the employer needs to know it in order to provide an accommodation that the individual is requesting. Okay, so there's lots of things people need to know. They can't be asked about disability on an application. They shouldn't be questioned about disability or have any questions that will elicit disability information during the interview process, and that they're entitled to an accommodation as early as the application phase if it's needed. And, again, if a building is operating and there's 2 steps to get into the building, and an individual's in a wheelchair, they need to be accommodated in that process. So there's all kinds of things. So the P&As can really help you with that stuff. And individuals need to think creatively about how the system can best work for them in their situation. Job placement and/or employment, whether it's for a person with a disability or whether it's for a person without a disability, is done one person at a time, one job, one person. Okay. So next slide, please. Okay, so here's where I really say, what is a protection and advocacy agency? I told you who we are, but I didn't really say this. Collectively, the Protection and Advocacy Network is the largest. It's a legally based advocacy organization in every state and territory. And collectively, we are the largest provider of legal-based services to people with the United States. And we collectively address more issues than the federal government does itself. So we are the largest enforcer of civil rights outside of the federal government. And I mentioned that there were 8 programs. Individuals going to the Protection and Advocacy Agency don't need to know that they're eligible for the PABS program or that they're eligible for the PAMI program, because as far as I'm concerned, these are terms of art that people in the general community don't understand. They just need to understand that they can go to the Protection and Advocacy Agency, that each of the federally funded programs does have an eligibility criteria that provides funding for a certain population of people or a certain disability category, and that they need to request services, and it is the responsibility of the P&A to determine whether or not your issue or disability is covered either by the funding for the program or the priorities for the program. There's things P&A agencies don't do. They don't deal with domestic dispute issues. They don't deal with divorces. They don't help people in criminal issues. But anyway, you can always go and you can always ask for services. Next slide, please. And that is the last one. Again, so I apologize for kind of doing things backwards, but I think this is a good opportunity for people to ask questions or clarifications, or I can sing and dance for you, or I can go off on some of my other favorite tantrums. Anybody have any questions? I'm going to mention a couple of things to you, since you are all advocates in grooming, to look at policy issues and situations in your states. That there's a lot of discussion lately around all kinds of things related to employment. and I'm looking at my notes. Today it's like I've taken 6 pages of notes today between the meetings that I've been on and whatever. So first of all, let me just ask everybody about, do you have any questions? Think about it for 30 seconds. And I'm going to look at my notes from what I heard this morning and maybe respond to a couple of things that I heard. No questions. Gosh, you guys are smart then. Is that Nancy Anderson I see?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So Cheryl, I have a question for you.
Okay.
Who now houses the client assistance program for the state of Alabama, which was discussed earlier today?
That would be the Alabama Disabilities Advocacy Program, or the P&A in Alabama. And that was probably the best thing that happened in the last year. And I'll tell you why. I was the director of the Client Assistance Program in Delaware. I was entirely self-trained because when I got there, I found this 3-ring binder on the shelf that had a bunch of laws and rules and regulations and all kinds of things in it. And I read that and I thought I was good to go. And I thought I was just kind of hot stuff because all of a sudden I was going to be helping people access VR services. And so I did that for about 3 years. And I figured I knew everything about vocational rehabilitation. Well, what I knew about vocational rehabilitation was a lot of what vocational rehabilitation policies were because they had provided them to me. And I was not smart enough to know the policies are not always consistent with law and regulations. So, and I had nobody else I could talk to because it was a limited funded program. I didn't have access to attorneys. I couldn't bounce things off of other people. I think having the CAP program within the P&A is again important because people then don't need to know, who do I have to go through for this? And the Alabama folks are going to be much more effective advocating for a program for whom they are not paid by that same program. So I am very proud and excited for Alabama.
And we are excited to have the program.
Yes, yes.
Anybody else have any questions for Cheryl?
No questions from me, but thank you for your time. It was just a lot of information that was very brand new for me. So I'm like processing mentally, but just want to say.
Yeah, I can't imagine that, you guys didn't know all of this stuff when you walked in the room. And anytime you have questions about things, you can you're welcome to contact me. I know my contact information is on another presentation, but these are also questions that you can ask of the ADAP staff. And I know that in this area, they know as much as I do because we've been working together and trained them over the years. So they don't know an answer, they can come to me and I'll give them the answer.
Cheryl does a very good job of making us look smart.
It's because you are.
Oh, well.
All right. Well, I apologize that tomorrow's presentation got done today. That's, it just kind of happened. But as long as you got a little bit of information out of it, you heard some concepts. And if you're talking to people with disabilities and they say things like, I can't go to work, I'm going to lose my benefits, there are ways around it. And they need to understand how things really work. I see. Go ahead and interject in Jennifer. Jennifer, you have something to say?
Well, I don't have a question, Cheryl, and I thank you for all the information you shared. What I would like to say, because I have an adult daughter with disability who's been employed for many years, is if you are just starting out or you have a child that's just starting out receiving Social Security benefits, or if you are in a transition where you might start receiving them yourselves, to take copious notes, to write a calendar of events, keep it on your calendar when you send in wages, etc. We had 1 year of wages that were never recorded from Social Security. They sat on a person's desk, and I had copies of everything that I had sent in. I had when it was mailed, etc. And we were in a 2-year back and forth about her payments. And it took, like I said, it took 2 years. It finally got corrected, but thank goodness I had all the documentation on our end that I could provide. There was a very sweet gal at Social Security that became our caseworker. And it takes a lot of collaboration when you want to just scream, but you have to keep your composure. And so I have 2 3-ring binders. I've kept every letter, every receipt from Social Security. So you just, when you have that documentation, y'all, it's tedious to do, but believe me, it will pay off. And you get your benefits back.
Yeah, I absolutely second that. And I encourage people, whether you're working with vocational rehabilitation or whether you're dealing with the Social Security Administration, that you generally keep a record of what has happened, you know, like a journal of when you went to vocational rehabilitation, who your counselor was, who you met with, you know, when did you try to call them, when did you meet with them, as well as Social Security, keeping records of when you do whatever. Because if it ever comes down to a challenge or a disagreement, your records are going to be vitally important in that squaring that away. Absolutely. And I think the other thing that I didn't really mention in here and underscore it is a lot of people with SSI are worried about going to work because they're going to reach that asset limit. And that is so easily avoidable now if people set up ABLE accounts. And, you know, ABLE accounts are now available. People need to utilize them. The current contribution level for individuals into an ABLE account, and again, I was on an ABLE call this morning, $17,000 a year that you can set aside in an ABLE account. The account can be used for all kinds of things, but an added notice here is that if the individual is employed and not participating in a company paid employment plan, they can put an additional $13,590 away in the ABLE account without it jeopardizing their benefit. So that's a pretty hefty amount of money that can be used to pay for things like better housing opportunities, you know, all kinds of things like that, medical services. So people should really make sure that if people know about ABLE accounts and encourage the utilization of them. Nancy, anything else?
Any other last minute questions for Cheryl? And remember, she's going to be here tomorrow morning at what time again?
Wait, I have this.
10 o'clock. She's
10 o'clock your time.
10 o'clock. Cheryl will be back. So if in the middle of the night you wake up and you have a question about a Social Security, jot it down and ask her tomorrow.
And tomorrow will be much more interactive. I promise. I promise. So I'm also gonna hang on and watch this movie with you.
So a member of the audience here physically at Lakeshore is Brian Geiger, who's with the Horizon School. And he was very appreciative of the information that you shared and is going to share it with the families with whom he works.
Great. Thank you. And if you need more, ADAP can help you. And I can help them if they need help